I was standing in a silent conference room, eyes locked on Joe as he calmly accused me of sabotaging the product launch. 20 colleagues stared, some in disbelief, some in pity, some in quiet agreement. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. He'd already poisoned the well. My hands were cold. He planned this. He knew exactly what he was doing. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Joe continued his performance, pointing at printed emails and charts that somehow painted me as the villain. "The evidence is clear," Joe said, his voice steady and confident. "Joan has been consistently missing deadlines, creating bottlenecks, and frankly, I believe she's been deliberately sabotaging our timeline." My heart hammered against my ribs. 3 years of perfect performance reviews, countless late nights debugging code, and this was my reward? Public humiliation in front of the entire product team. The director, Amanda, shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Her eyes moved between Joe's presentation and my stunned face. "Joan," Amanda said finally, "do you have anything to say for yourself?" I felt my throat close up. Everyone was waiting for my response, but Joe's lies had left me speechless. 4 months earlier, I was just doing my job, senior product manager 5 years in, loved by my team. I worked late, kept projects on track, and quietly fixed the things Joe dropped when he got distracted or disappeared. Joe wasn't incompetent, he was lazy when it counted, and polished when it was public. He had this way of charming executives while leaving the actual work to people like me. I'd cover for him, thinking I was being a good teammate. He'd been promoted to project lead 6 months ago, fresh from his MBA program, young, ambitious, and eager to make his mark. At first, I thought we'd work well together. He seemed to appreciate my experience and technical knowledge. But this accusation in the conference room? This wasn't laziness or poor management. This was calculated. This was a setup designed to destroy my reputation and remove me as a threat to his advancement. I could see it in his eyes, the cold satisfaction of someone executing a plan. But what Joe didn't know was that I could prove it. Every lie, every manipulation, every piece of evidence he'd fabricated. And I would. Joe had a habit of disappearing the week before every deadline. Project status meetings would come and go without him, leaving me to explain delays and technical challenges to increasingly frustrated stakeholders. I'd cover for him, thinking I was being a good teammate and protecting the project. But when we missed our Q1 launch by 2 weeks, Joe called me out, only me, in the recap email to the executives. He painted himself as the strategic visionary while describing me as someone who couldn't execute on basic deliverables. The worst part was how he twisted the facts. He referenced specific Jira tickets that showed incomplete work assigned to me. When I checked those tickets, something felt wrong. The descriptions didn't match what I remembered working on. One ticket read, "Redesign entire user authentication system," and was marked as incomplete, but I distinctly remembered the original task being fix login button alignment, a 5-minute CSS change that I'd completed immediately. He even quoted a ticket I was certain I hadn't written, but it had my name attached as the creator. That's when I started looking closer at our project management system. That's when I discovered Joe was rewriting history. Slack logs don't lie, unless someone deletes them fast. I remembered a specific conversation where Joe had acknowledged a critical bug was his responsibility, not mine. He'd even apologized for the confusion and promised to handle the client communication himself. But when I searched for that conversation in our Slack history, it was gone, completely erased, as if it had never happened. Joe had admin privileges, which meant he could delete messages without leaving traces in the standard user interface. Good thing I had auto backups enabled in my email. Every Slack conversation was automatically forwarded to my personal Gmail account, a habit I developed years ago when we lost important client discussions due to system crashes. I searched my email archive and found the original conversation. Screenshots, timestamps, everything. Joe had explicitly taken responsibility for the bug, then deleted the evidence and reassigned blame to me. He didn't know I exported everything by habit. Digital pack rat tendencies that my colleagues used to tease me about were about to become my salvation. I created a new folder in my personal documents. I named it Insurance. And that was just the beginning of what I would discover. I dug deeper into our project management system and found more evidence of Joe's manipulation. tickets rewritten after completion, priority tasks reassigned under my account, timestamps altered to make me look like I was consistently behind schedule. The changes were subtle but systematic. He'd wait until I completed a task, then edit the original description to make it seem like I'd only finished part of the work. A simple update contact form validation would become completely rebuild contact management system with advanced analytics. He was slowly building a narrative that I was disorganized, error-prone, and unable to understand project requirements. The scary part was how well it had worked. During our last quarterly review, the board asked if I needed additional support or training resources. I smiled through that meeting, took detailed notes, and started keeping screenshots of every task before I began work. I documented conversations, saved email threads, and created backup copies of every deliverable. My insurance folder grew larger each week, filled with evidence of Joe's systematic campaign to undermine my reputation. The paper trail was becoming undeniable, but I needed to be smart about how I used it. Joe never blamed the guys on our team, only me. I was the only woman on the leadership team, and his targeting felt deliberate. He'd call me detail-oriented in meetings, which sounds like a compliment until you realize he meant I was slowing down progress with unnecessary perfectionism. In private conversations with other team members, he described me as someone who was struggling with the pace or having trouble adapting to new methodologies. The comments always had enough truth to sound reasonable while painting me as incompetent. Passive-aggressive compliments became his specialty. "Joan always asks great questions," he'd say in front of clients, then add, "Sometimes we need to balance thoroughness with velocity." The message was clear. I was holding the team back with my inability to work efficiently. It was death by 1,000 cuts, each comment small enough to seem harmless, but collectively devastating to my professional reputation. Until he finally made a mistake that gave me the smoking gun I needed. His overconfidence would be his downfall. One late night, I was finishing up some database optimization when I saw a Jira change notification pop up on my screen. Someone had edited one of my tasks and marked it as incomplete. The timestamp showed the change happening in real time, except I was staring at my untouched laptop. I hadn't made any changes to anything. Someone else was editing tasks under my account, and I was watching it happen live. I immediately took screenshots of the changelog, including the IP address that had made the modification. Then, I checked the admin access logs, something most team members didn't even know existed. Joe's IP address was logged as making changes to my account at the exact time the modifications occurred. He'd used his admin privileges to impersonate me, creating false evidence of incomplete or substandard work. This wasn't just poor management or miscommunication. This was fraud. Joe was systematically falsifying records to build a case against me, and I had the technical evidence to prove it. I saved everything: screenshots, IP logs, timestamps, and system records that showed exactly when each falsification occurred. And I wasn't going to keep quiet anymore. I didn't explode or confront Joe immediately. Instead, I smiled more in meetings, thanked him publicly for his guidance, and played the perfect team player while documenting every interaction we had. My newfound enthusiasm seemed to encourage Joe's behavior. He got bolder with his manipulations, more obvious with his credit stealing, and more careless with covering his tracks. People started noticing the dynamic. Other team members would raise eyebrows when Joe took credit for work they'd seen me complete. But corporate politics made them hesitant to speak up directly. That's when HR contacted me for a routine performance discussion that felt anything but routine. They wanted to discuss concerns that had been raised about my recent work quality and team collaboration. Someone had been feeding HR a carefully crafted narrative about my supposed performance issues. The conversation felt like a setup, with leading questions designed to get me to admit fault for problems I hadn't created. I realized Joe wasn't working alone. He had allies in management who were helping orchestrate my downfall. But I had leverage they hadn't seen coming. During the HR meeting, I maintained my professional composure while taking detailed notes. They asked about specific incidents that I recognized from Joe's fabricated evidence, deadlines I had supposedly missed, client complaints about work I'd never been assigned to do. I answered honestly and offered to provide documentation that would clarify the timeline of events. HR seemed surprised by my willingness to be transparent and my confidence in my version of events. "We'll circle back after reviewing everything," they said, which felt ominous. That afternoon, a recruiter contacted me via LinkedIn. Someone from Nexus Technologies, one of our biggest competitors, wanted to discuss an exciting opportunity for a senior product manager with proven expertise in our market segment. I almost declined immediately. 3 years at my current company had built strong loyalty, despite Joe's sabotage. But something about the timing felt significant. The recruiter mentioned they were specifically interested in my experience with the project management methodologies and technical systems I'd been working with. They'd clearly been following my career closely. I agreed to an informal conversation, just to explore what they might offer. That phone call would change everything. The conversation with Nexus Technologies was eye-opening. They didn't just want to hire me, they wanted me to lead their technical due diligence for a major acquisition they were planning. "We've been tracking your work for years," the hiring manager explained. "Your approach to product development and team management is exactly what we need for this project." The position came with a significant salary increase, equity options, and most importantly, the chance to work in an environment that actually valued technical expertise over political maneuvering. But the real kicker came at the end of the call. "The company we're acquiring is in your current market segment. Your insider knowledge of industry practices and competitive landscape would be invaluable." They were planning to acquire my current company. I would be evaluating my own workplace from the outside, with the authority to assess every manager, every process, and every project, including Joe's systematic fraud and manipulation. I asked for time to consider the offer, but I already knew my answer. 2 weeks later, I gave my notice. My departure announcement sent ripples through the office. Joe played it perfectly, expressing regret about losing a valuable team member, while subtly suggesting that some people aren't built for high-pressure environments. He even offered to throw me a farewell party, which felt like a final insult, but I accepted graciously, maintaining my professional facade while counting down the days until I could reveal the truth about his behavior. During my final weeks, I focused on documenting everything for my replacement. Not because Joe deserved my help, but because the other team members didn't deserve to suffer for his incompetence. I also quietly backed up copies of all my work. Code repositories, project documentation, process improvements I'd developed. Everything I'd built belonged to the company legally, but my knowledge of how it all worked belonged to me. On my last day, Joe shook my hand and wished me well. "I hope this new opportunity works out," he said with what seemed like genuine warmth. He had no idea he'd just wished me well in my mission to expose him. 3 weeks later, I walked back into that same building, wearing a visitor's badge and carrying the authority to audit everything Joe had ever touched. Nexus Technologies moved quickly on their acquisition plans. Within a month of my hiring, I was back in my former workplace as lead consultant for technical due diligence. The irony was delicious. Joe's systematic campaign to push me out had resulted in me returning with the power to evaluate his competence for potential buyers. I started my audit with the projects I knew best, the ones where Joe had manipulated records and stolen credit. The technical quality was solid because I'd built most of them, but the project management was a disaster. Every initiative Joe had led showed the same pattern: budget overruns, missed deadlines, scope creep, and team dysfunction. When things went wrong, the documentation consistently blamed technical staff rather than management decisions. But I also had access to system logs, backup files, and administrative records that told a very different story. The timestamps on Joe's edits, the deleted conversations, the falsified task assignments, it was all preserved in the company's own systems. I compiled everything into a comprehensive report that would be read by people who actually had the power to act on the information. Joe had no idea what was coming. The conference room scene happened during my 3rd week back. Joe had called an emergency meeting to address performance issues that were threatening the Q3 launch timeline. 20 colleagues sat around the polished table, as Joe presented his analysis of what had gone wrong. Charts showed missed deadlines, budget overruns, and quality problems that had emerged since my departure. His conclusion was masterful. These issues trace back to foundational problems in our project structure. Joan left behind several incomplete deliverables that have created cascading failures throughout our development cycle. He was blaming me for problems that had occurred weeks after I'd left the company. It was breathtakingly audacious, even for Joe. That's when I spoke up for my position as a consultant observer. Joe, those timelines don't seem consistent with the project records I've been reviewing. Could you walk through the specific deliverables you're referencing? The room fell silent. Joe's confident expression faltered as he realized I was no longer the powerless team member he could manipulate. I was there in an official capacity, with authority backing me up. Joan, he said carefully, I'm not sure this is the appropriate forum for. Actually, I interrupted gently, it's exactly the appropriate forum. Let's talk about what really happened. I didn't defend myself against Joe's accusations. Instead, I asked questions that exposed the logical holes in his narrative. When exactly did these foundational problems emerge? I asked, pulling out my tablet, because the system logs show all major deliverables were completed and tested before my departure date. Joe tried to deflect. The issues became apparent over time as we attempted to build on the incomplete framework. Interesting, I replied, scrolling through my documentation. Could you show us the specific technical debt or incomplete features you're referring to? I have the original project specifications here. The room watched this exchange with growing tension. My former colleagues could sense something significant happening, but they couldn't quite understand the dynamic. Joe was squirming now, trying to maintain his authority while realizing he was trapped. He couldn't provide specifics because the problems he was describing didn't exist. Joan, I think we should discuss this privately, he said, attempting to regain control. Actually, Amanda interrupted, I think we should continue this conversation. Joan is here in a consulting capacity, and these project details are relevant to our operational review. Joe had walked into his own trap, and now he couldn't escape without admitting his lies. Over the next hour, I systematically dismantled Joe's narrative, using the company's own records. I showed timestamps proving when tasks were actually completed, IP logs revealing who had made post-completion edits, and backup files containing the original project requirements. Joe's face went through several color changes as I presented evidence of his manipulations. The deleted Slack conversations, the falsified Jira tickets, the admin access abuse, everything I'd been documenting for months. These logs show someone using administrative privileges to modify project records after completion, I explained to the room. The changes consistently altered successful deliverables to appear incomplete or substandard. I didn't need to name Joe directly. The IP addresses and access logs made it clear who was responsible. Other team members started speaking up, sharing their own experiences with mysteriously changing requirements and disappearing communications. The pattern became undeniable once people felt safe to discuss what they'd witnessed. Joe tried to interrupt several times, but Amanda silenced him. Let her finish, she said firmly. By the end of the meeting, Joe's carefully constructed lies lay in ruins, exposed by the very system he'd used to create them. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Joe was placed on administrative leave, pending a full investigation. HR launched a comprehensive review of his project management practices and system access logs. Within a week, 2 other team members came forward with their own documentation of Joe's behavior. They'd been too afraid to speak up individually, but my presentation had given them courage to share their experiences. The investigation revealed a pattern of systematic fraud that went back months. Joe had been falsifying records, manipulating project data, and using his administrative access to cover up his own failures while building cases against team members he perceived as threats. He was terminated for cause 2 weeks later. No severance, no recommendations, and a permanent flag in his HR file that would follow him to any future employment that checked references. Meanwhile, Nexus moved forward with the acquisition. My audit report had identified the management problems while confirming the underlying technical value of the company. The purchase went through at full value, with the understanding that significant leadership changes would be necessary. 3 months after the acquisition, I was offered the position of Director of Product Development, essentially Joe's former role, but with expanded authority and a mandate to rebuild the team culture. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Joe's campaign to destroy my career had ultimately resulted in me taking his job with a better company. My first initiative was implementing transparent project management practices that would prevent the kind of manipulation Joe had perfected. All changes to project records were logged with immutable timestamps. Team communications were archived automatically. Administrative access was restricted and monitored. Most importantly, I established regular one-on-one meetings with every team member to create safe spaces for reporting concerns before they escalated into systematic abuse. The team responded enthusiastically. Productivity increased, morale improved, and client satisfaction scores reached all-time highs. We were finally able to focus on building great products instead of navigating office politics and covering for incompetent management. Joe's toxic legacy was completely erased within 6 months. I never spoke to Joe again after his termination, but I heard through mutual connections that he struggled to find comparable employment. The tech industry is smaller than people realize, and word spreads quickly about managers who can't be trusted with administrative access. His LinkedIn profile showed a series of short-term consulting gigs, each lasting only a few months. The pattern suggested he was having trouble maintaining positions once employers discovered his work style. Meanwhile, my career flourished at Nexus. The skills I'd developed while documenting Joe's fraud made me exceptionally good at identifying and preventing project management problems before they impacted deliverables. I started speaking at industry conferences about building transparent, accountable team cultures. My presentations always included anonymized case studies based on Joe's behavior, turning his negative example into positive lessons for other organizations. The documentation folder that had saved my career became a teaching tool for helping others recognize and respond to workplace manipulation. 2 years later, I received an unexpected message from a former colleague at my old company. She'd been hired shortly before my departure and had witnessed some of Joe's behavior without fully understanding what was happening. "I wish I'd been brave enough to speak up," she wrote. "I saw him changing things in the system but thought it was normal management oversight. I didn't realize he was systematically targeting you." Her message reminded me that Joe's impact extended beyond my personal experience. He'd created a culture of fear that prevented people from questioning obvious problems or supporting colleagues under attack. I invited her to join our team at Nexus. She became one of our most valuable contributors, thriving in an environment that valued honesty and collaboration over political maneuvering. Several other former colleagues followed over the months that followed. They'd all been damaged by Joe's toxic management, but found new confidence working in a healthy culture. Joe had inadvertently helped me build an exceptional team by driving away all the talented people who refused to tolerate his behavior. 5 years after the acquisition, our division had become Nexus's most profitable business unit. The team I'd inherited from Joe's mismanagement had grown into an industry-leading product development organization. We consistently delivered projects on time and under budget. Client retention was over 95%. Employee satisfaction scores were the highest in company history. During our annual review, the CEO pulled me aside to discuss the transformation. "When we acquired your former company, the due diligence report flagged serious management concerns," he said. "But you've turned it into our crown jewel. How did you do it?" I thought about Joe's systematic lies, the months of documentation, the insurance folder that had saved my career. "Transparency," I said simply. "When people feel safe to tell the truth, amazing things become possible." The CEO nodded thoughtfully. "Would you be interested in expanding that approach across our other divisions?" 3 months later, I was promoted to VP of Operations, with a mandate to implement culture change initiatives throughout the company. Joe's attempts to destroy my career had accidentally prepared me for executive leadership. My new role involved auditing management practices across all of Nexus's business units. It was like having a superpower, the ability to spot toxic patterns before they destroyed teams or projects. I found 3 other situations where managers were using systematic manipulation to cover up their own incompetence. In each case, I worked with HR to document the behavior and implement corrective measures. Sometimes the managers could be retrained and reformed. Other times, termination was the only option. But in every case, the underlying issue was the same: insecure leaders who protected themselves by undermining their team members. I developed training programs for new managers that focused on transparent communication, accountable decision-making, and building trust rather than fear. The Joe situation became a case study in these programs, an example of how quickly toxic behavior can escalate when left unchecked. His negative example was helping create better leaders throughout the industry. 10 years later, I was leading a team of 500 people across multiple product lines. Nexus had grown from a mid-size competitor to an industry leader, partly due to our reputation for exceptional workplace culture and talent retention. I still kept my original insurance folder, though I rarely opened it anymore. It served as a reminder of how close I'd come to letting Joe destroy my confidence and career. Sometimes, when I mentored young professionals dealing with difficult managers, I'd share parts of the story. Not for revenge or vindication, but as a lesson about the importance of documentation and strategic patience. Toxic people exist in every organization, I'd tell them. The question isn't whether you'll encounter them, but whether you'll be prepared when you do. Most importantly, I tried to create the kind of workplace culture I'd wished for during Joe's campaign against me. A place where competence was valued over politics, where truth was rewarded instead of punished. Every successful project, every promoted team member, every satisfied client was proof that Joe's approach was not only wrong, but completely unnecessary. During a recent industry conference, I was approached by a young product manager who looked familiar. It took me a moment to realize she was one of Joe's former direct reports from his brief tenure at a startup. "You probably don't remember me," she said nervously, "but I worked under Joe Williams about 5 years ago. I heard you speak about documentation and accountability, and I wanted to thank you." She explained that Joe's behavior at the startup had been similar to what I'd experienced. But this time, people were prepared. They'd heard stories about his previous manipulations and had implemented preventive measures. "We kept everything documented from day one," she said. "When he tried to falsify project records, we caught him immediately. He was terminated within 3 months." The story gave me unexpected satisfaction. Joe's reputation had preceded him, creating a defensive response that prevented him from victimizing new teams. My decision to speak publicly about documentation and transparency had created a kind of early warning system that protected other professionals from experiencing what I'd endured. Today, when people ask about my management philosophy, I always start with a simple principle: trust but verify. It's a lesson Joe taught me through negative example, the importance of having systems that make deception impossible rather than relying on individual integrity. Every project has transparent timelines, immutable change logs, and multiple accountability checkpoints. Team members know their contributions will be accurately credited and their concerns will be heard. It's the opposite of everything Joe represented, and it works. Our teams consistently outperform industry benchmarks for productivity, innovation, and employee satisfaction. We attract top talent because people want to work in environments where they can focus on excellence rather than politics. The insurance folder that saved my career has evolved into institutional practices that protect entire organizations from toxic leadership. Joe's legacy isn't the fear and dysfunction he tried to create. It's the systems and culture we built to ensure no one else would ever have to endure what he put me through. I never sought revenge against Joe. I didn't need to. His own behavior had been his downfall. My role was simply documenting the truth and ensuring the right people saw it. Today, when young professionals ask for career advice, I always emphasize the same points. Keep records, trust your instincts, build alliances, and never let someone else's insecurity become your limitation. Joe taught me that sometimes the most dangerous enemies are the ones who smile while they sabotage you. But he also taught me that methodical preparation and strategic patience can overcome even the most sophisticated manipulation. The conference room where he accused me of sabotage was torn down during a recent office renovation. In its place is a collaborative workspace designed for transparency and open communication. It's a fitting metaphor. Joe's legacy of secrecy and deception has been replaced by systems that make truth inevitable. He tried to write me out of the story. Instead, I used his own techniques against him and built something better from the ruins of his credibility. And I kept receipts for everything. The documentation folder still exists, archived in my personal files, as a reminder of how far I've come and how important it is to always be prepared for the next Joe. Because there's always a next one, and next time, I'll be ready.